Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be implementing rainbow pets into our game. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also to subscribe button, and turn post notifications on so you get notified every time I upload a brand new video. As always, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode. There's a link down below the description, and you guys can go check that out. With that being said, let's get right into it. Now, the first thing that we're going to want to do before hopping directly into studio is go down below in the description, and there's going to be a link directly to this post from my Patreon, which is completely free and accessible by everyone. Once you're on this post, you're going to want to download the assets.zip file. And inside of this file are going to be a couple of other .rbxm files, which can be used to put directly into Roblox Studio. So now that we have that file downloaded, let's then go ahead and import the rainbow pet model into our game. So go into the workspace, we're going to go ahead and right click on this and click on Insert from File. After that, we're then going to want to go to the assets folder that we just downloaded, and then we'll select the pet rainbow model and click on Open. Now that we've done that, we can see it's actually been added inside of our workspace, but we can't really see it because this GUI is covering it. So let's go ahead and actually hide that. We're going to go to the Start GUI, select the pet rainbow GUI, and set enabled to no longer be true. Now that we've done that, we can actually see the workspace. So what we're going to do is select this model, and then we're going to just drag it and basically reposition it where we want it to be. Now where I'm going to put my pet rainbow machine is actually going to be on the Arctic island. So I'm going to drag it up here, and then I'm going to bring it down a little bit, and then actually let me throw it inside of the Arctic folder as well, just so it doesn't reposition itself. And now we can go ahead and reposition this. So I think that's looking pretty good, but we're just going to move it over a tiny bit, and now that's looking pretty good to me. Now you can of course add more of these models into your game. Of course, just make sure that you keep the pet rainbow name the same, and also make sure that you have a hitbox inside of here, and the primary part of this model is set to that hitbox, otherwise you might run into some issues. Cool, so now that we've added this model to the game, we can actually begin scripting. Now to begin scripting, the first thing that we'll do is actually update our pets config. So we'll go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the configs folder, and open up the pets config. Now inside of here, we actually want to update the pet upgrade type because we want to include rainbow in this as well. Additionally, in the future, we are going to be using the Tween service, so let's go ahead and add the Tween service variable inside of here as well. Then to the pet instance, we also want to add a new property to this, which is going to be called rainbow, and that's of course going to be a boolean. We also want to add a second property to this as well, which is going to be called rainbow time, and that's actually going to be a number. This property is also going to be optional, so we're going to put a question mark here because it may not always exist. Then below our other constants, we'll create a new constant, which is going to be called default max rainbowing pets. And that's going to be set to 5. Now what this variable is going to be used for is how many pets the player can actually queue up to make rainbow. So for instance, the player is only able to queue up to 5 pets to become rainbow at a time, and then for them to create more rainbow pets, they're going to have to either wait for pets to be completed and finish rainbowing, or they're going to have to claim their finished rainbowing pets. Then what we'll do is update the get current upgrade function, and we're actually going to replace the first if statement. So what we first want to check is if the pet is rainbow. And if the pet is rainbow, then we of course want to just return rainbow. And then we're going to basically just copy and paste the shiny part right here, and then we'll do the same exact thing that we did previously for golden. Cool, now that we've done that, let's go ahead and start creating some more functions. The first function that we're going to create is called get upgrade time. Now this function is going to accept one argument, which is called selected amount, and that's going to be a number. Now we're going to use this function whenever we want to determine how long an upgrade is actually going to take, because remember, if the player adds more pets to the pet that they want to rainbow, then that's going to actually decrease the duration for how long it takes to upgrade that single pet to rainbow. So inside of here, we'll create a variable called amount, and that's not going to be set to anything. Then we want to check the selected amount. Now, if the selected amount equals 1, then we're going to set the amount variable equal to 172,800. Now, you might be thinking, what is that number? Well, that number is the amount of seconds that are in 48 hours. So if the player is trying to make a pet rainbow and they only select one single pet, then that's going to take 2 days to upgrade, aka 172,800 seconds. Then we can pretty much just copy and paste this. And now we're going to say else if selected amount equals 2. So now if the selected amount equals 2, then we're actually going to decrease this duration by half, and it's only going to take 86,400 seconds, which is equal to 24 hours. We can then go ahead and copy and paste that again, and for 3 pets, we'll knock this down to 43,200 seconds. And then we'll knock it down again for 4 pets, this time 21,600 seconds. And finally, if they go up to 5, then we're going to reduce it down to 1,800 seconds. Now, if you're wondering how long 1,800 seconds is, that's just 30 minutes. Now, you of course can change any of these times. Remember, this number is just the amount of time in seconds it's going to take. So this is going to take 2 days. This is going to take 1 day, while this is going to take 30 minutes. Now, finally, after we go through that if statement, we'll then return the amount variable. Cool. Now let's create another function. This function is going to be called get current amount of rainbowing pets. and that's going to accept an argument called data. Then we're going to create a variable inside of here called amount. That's going to be set to 0. Then we want to loop through all the pets inside of the player's pet rainbow queue that the player is currently upgrading to rainbow. So we're going to say for UUID, comma pet in data.pet rainbow do. Now, we haven't actually added the pet rainbow stat to our player's data yet, but we will do that after we update this config. And all we're going to do is each time we loop through here, we're just going to add 1 to the amount variable. And finally, after we loop through there, we're going to return the amount variable. Then we'll create another function. This one's going to be called get max rainbowing pets. And we'll accept the data argument again. This time we'll create a variable called amount, and that's going to be equal to the default max rainbowing pets. And then inside of here, we could do game pass checks or anything else like that, where we want to increase the max amount of rainbowing pets that the player can actually queue. So then finally, we will return the amount variable. Now we're going to create one final function, which is going to be called rainbow tween. And that's going to accept an instance, which is going to be an instance, as well as an index, which is going to be a number. Now, this function might seem a little odd. I'll admit I do have to give a little bit of credit to ChatGPT because GPT did really help me speed up and create this function specifically. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we want to check the instance's parent. And if there is no parent, then we want to stop the function right there. Now, the reason that we're doing this is because basically this rainbow tween function is going to be called over and over and over again. And this function is actually going to be calling itself. The reason for that is because if we have a pet which is rainbow, we want to constantly recolor all the parts of that specific pet, as well as update the background color of the pet being displayed in the GUI. So that color is going to be constantly updating over and over and over again, and that's why this function is going to be calling itself. Now, after we do that, we're going to create a variable called next index, and that's going to be equal to index plus 1. Now, above this function, or we could even do this towards the top of the script, it really doesn't matter, we're going to create a variable called rainbow colors, and that's going to be equal to a table. Now, inside of this table, we're going to actually add 3 different colors inside of here. So we're going to say color3.from RGB, and then we're going to pick our first color. So I'm going to go with a red. Then we'll add a comma here, and we'll say once again color3.from RGB, and then I'm going to add a green. And then I'll copy and paste this one more time, and our final color is going to be a blue. Cool. So now that we've got that variable created, going back to the rainbow tween function, we're then going to check if the next index is greater than the amount of elements that are inside of the rainbow colors table. Now, if that is, then we're going to reset the next index variable, and that's going to be equal to 1. So we're basically resetting the variable to 1 and starting and going through all the colors again. After we do that, we'll create a variable called property, and how we set that is going to be based off of what type the instance actually is. So we're going to say if instance is a, and now if it's a base part, then the property that we want to update is going to be called color. Otherwise, if the instance is not a base part, then we know it's a GUI object, and we want to update the background color 3 on that object. Now, after we do that, we can kind of start creating our tween. So we're going to create a variable called tween info, and that's going to be equal to tween info.new. And now the time that this tween is going to take, we'll set that to 1. And then for my easing style, I'm going to go with linear. Now, after that, we can then go ahead and actually create the tween. So tween service semicolon create. Now, for the instance, we of course want to use the instance that we have there. And then we want to pass through the tween info for the tween info. And now for the property table, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new table. And since we've created that property variable, inside of this property table, how we actually update that specific property is we actually have to surround the property variable in brackets. So that's why we're doing it right there. And then we're going to set that equal to rainbow colors. And then we're going to index that with the next index variable. So this is how your tween variable should look like. If you forgot to surround the property variable in brackets when you use it right here, this will not actually work. What this will do is the tween service will actually think that we want to update a property called property spelled exactly like this, so in all lowercases, and that property obviously doesn't exist on any instance, so this is just going to give you an error. But when we surround this in brackets, that will use the actual value of this variable right here. So now we're going to either be updating the color property or the background color 3 property on that specific instance. And now that we've created that tween, what we can then do is listen for when it gets completed. And whenever it gets completed, we're going to set the index to the next index, and then we're going to call this function again. So rainbow tween, and we're going to pass through the instance as well as the index. And then after we listen for it to be completed, let's then go ahead and play it. Cool. So that's all that we have to do with this function. Like I said, this function is going to continuously recall itself over and over and over again, and it's just going to constantly be updating either the color of the parts of the pet or the background color 3 of the GUI object displaying the pet as well. Cool. Now that we finished with updating the pet's config, we can actually go ahead and update the player's data. So to do this, we're going to go still inside of the replicated storage, go to the player data, and open up the template module script. Now that we're in here, we're going to scroll down to the template variable that we have right here. And honestly, I'm just going to insert this directly below the pet bank. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable here called pet rainbow, and that's just going to be equal to a blank table like all of our other pet variables for the most part. And that's it. That's all we had to do. So now we're done with the template. Now that we've updated our player data, let's go ahead and actually start scripting the GUI. Going inside of the star player, inside of the star player scripts, we'll open up this GUI folder here, and we're going to throw in a brand new local script. We'll then rename this to pet rainbow, and we're going to need quite a few variables inside of here, which I'm going to start stealing some from the pet bank. So I'm just going to copy and paste pretty much all of these, because this GUI is going to be handled very similarly to how we actually do the pet bank. And now let's go ahead and actually update some of these variables. So we will need the state manager as well as the pet utils, but we won't need the pet bank config. Instead, what we'll need is the actual pets config. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that, pets config. Along with those, we're going to need the viewport model module as well, which is inside of the replicated storage.libs.viewport model. So let's go ahead and create that variable. And along with that library, we're also going to need the format time library that we added a while ago as well. So let's go ahead and create a variable for that. And now all of those variables are pretty much good. We then want to update the GUI variable, and that's going to actually use the pet rainbow GUI, not the pet bank, of course. We then have our frame variable, which is correct, but we can delete pretty much all of those variables except for the exit button. And then let's start creating some variables for the specific elements in our GUI. So we're going to create a variable called mode frame, and that's going to be equal to the frame.mode. And then we'll also create a variable called bottom frame, which is going to be equal to frame.bottom. We'll then also create a variable for both of the containers. So make container is going to be equal to frame.make container. And then the view container variable is going to be equal to frame.view container. Cool. And then we also have the exit button as well, which is perfect. Then we have our mode type. Now we actually want to update this. The two modes that we're going to have are going to be called make and view. It can also be nil as well, because like I said, we're going to be using a lot of the same logic that we do in the pet bank. And then we still have our type called mode, and then we also still have our selected pets variable. So that's all great. And we can also close our pet bank script if you haven't done that already. Now, as usual, let's start off by scripting the parts. So we're going to create a brand new function called generate parts, and we're going to loop through all of the descendants inside of the workspace. So workspace get descendants do. Now, if the descendant is named pet rainbow, then we know that that's the model that we're actually looking for. So now that we have the model that we're looking for, what we can then do is listen for the primary part to be touched. And whenever it's touched, we can connect that to an anonymous function, which is going to accept an argument called other part. Now inside of this function, we of course are going to create a variable called player, and that's going to be equal to players get player from character, and we're going to pass through the other part dot parent. Now, if we are actually able to find a player from there, and that player is equal to the local player, then we want to display the GUI. So we're just going to say GUI.enabled equals true for right now. So now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and then make sure that we call it. Now that we've created that function, let's start off by creating another function, and this one's going to be called select mode. This is also going to accept a mode, which is of course of the mode type that we created earlier. Now inside of here, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we actually set our mode variable to the mode which is passed to this function. So now that we've updated the mode that we're currently in, we then want to update all the frames that are visible to the player. Now it's a lot easier if we actually look at the GUI, so we can go inside of our star GUI, expand that GUI itself, and then we can look at all the different things that we have inside of here. Now let's think for a minute. When do we want to display the make container? We only want to display the make container is if the mode is set to make. Otherwise, we don't want this to ever be visible. The same goes for the view container. We only want to display that if the player swaps to the view mode. So let's add that to this function right here. We're going to say make container dot visible equals mode equals make, and then we'll do the same thing for view. So view container is only going to be visible if the mode equals view. Now along with the make container, we also have a frame called bottom, and we only want to display that bottom frame if the make container is displayed as well, because the player is in the make mode. So we're going to say bottom frame dot visible equals mode equals make. Now we also have the mode frame. We only want to display this if the player has not selected a mode yet. So we're going to say mode frame dot visible equals not mode. And then after that, we then are going to check if the mode is set to something. So for instance, if the mode is set to make, then we want to do something. Otherwise, we want to check is if the mode equals view, then we also want to do something as well. And what we're going to do is generate the containers how they should be. So now that we've created this function, we're not done with this yet, and we will come back to it. Let's create a brand new function called generate view container, and that's not going to accept any arguments. Now, to make this as clear as possible, I'm going to go ahead and enable this GUI so that we can actually see it. Let's go ahead and make the view container visible, as well as making the template visible so that we can see what it looks like and what we're kind of working on right now. So this is the view container, and since we just created the generate view container function, we know that we want to clone this template and do everything to it that we need to display the pet to the player. Now, along with all of that, in the view container, we don't actually have the no queue text label inside of there, but this text label kind of goes along with the view container. We actually want to display this text label if the player has no pets in queue inside of their view container. So that's the first thing that we're going to actually do inside of this function. We're going to say local pets equals stateManager.getData, and then we're going to get that pet rainbow table that we just created. Now we want to check if there's any pets inside of here, and if there's none, then we want to set the no-Q text label to be visible. Now checking the amount of elements inside of a dictionary is not as simple as it is for an array. So for example, if the pets variable was an array, we could say if hashtag pets, so if the amount of pets is say greater than 0, then we could do something here because that's how we're able to get the number. But since the pets variable is actually a dictionary, we're not able to do this so easily. What we have to actually do instead is we're going to use a function called next, and we're going to pass through pets to that, and we're going to see if this equals nil. Now if this does equal nil, then we know that there are actually no pets inside of this table. So then we're going to set the visibility of the no-Q text label to true so that we can actually see it. Now after we set this to be visible, we also want to say return as well because we don't want to generate any of the pets, and that's why we're using the return keyword because that'll stop the function right there. So now we'll only get to this line if the player does have some pets inside of their table. So what we're then going to do is loop through all those pets. We'll say for UUID, comma pet instance in pets do, and then we'll create a variable called clone, and that's going to be equal to the view container dot template, and then we want to clone that. We'll then set the parent of that clone to the view container. We'll then also update the name of that and set that equal to the UUID, and then we also want to make that visible as well. Let's go ahead and then actually get the pet model, and that's going to be equal to petsconfig.getModel, and we're going to pass through the pet instance. Now that we've gotten that model, let's then go ahead and generate the viewport frame using the viewport model module. So viewport model.generate viewport will pass through the clone.viewport frame, the pet model, and the cframe.angles 0 math.rad -90, 0 once again. Now after that, we have to update some of the text labels. So let's create a variable called isFinished. And how we calculate if the pet is actually finished or not is by getting the current time. So os.time will give us the current time. And then we want to check if that's greater than or equal to the pet instance.rainbow time. So remember, rainbow time is an optional variable that we can set on these objects. And if rainbow time is set, it'll be set to a specific time when this pet is finished upgrading and can be claimed. So now that we know if it's finished or not, we then want to update the ready text label, and we only want to set this to be visible if it is not finished yet. We also want to do this for the unlock text label as well, so we're only going to make that visible if the pet is not finished. Then we're going to update the time text label. So we're going to say clone.time.text equals. If the pet is finished, then we actually want this to say finished with an exclamation mark. Otherwise, we're going to use the format time module and convert the amount of seconds into a nice readable string. And now to get the amount of time left on the pet, we're going to say pet.instance and get the rainbow time property and subtract the current time from that. Now that we've updated the time text label, we can also update the by text button, and we want to update the text of this. Now, if the pet is finished, then we want to set the text of this to claim. Otherwise, we want to set the text of this to 799, our money symbol, which stands for 799 Robux, basically indicating to the player that they can purchase or speed this up by paying Robux. Now we've updated pretty much everything that goes along with the specific template frame. What we're then going to do is listen for the buy button to be clicked on. So mouse button one click, connect that to an anonymous function. Now, if the os.time is greater than or equal to the pet instance.rainbow time. So basically, if the pet is finished upgrading, then what we're going to do is fire a remote event called claim rainbow pet. So we'll call fire server on that, and we're going to pass through the pet's UUID. Now we actually haven't created this remote event yet, so don't worry if you're panicking because we did not actually create this yet. Don't worry. Now if the pet has not been finished yet, then what we want to do when the player clicks this button is basically pop up a game pass that the player can purchase. So we'll just comment this out and say buy dev product right here. Now that we've created that function, we can go ahead and call this function, and what we're going to call this is whenever the player selects the view mode. So we're going to say generate view container right there. Now that we've done that, we're going to create a function above this function, which is going to be called update pets. Now the way that we're going to use this function is because the player can just continuously look at this GUI, and of course the time is going to be ticking down for when they're able to claim their pet. And because we want the time to be ticking down, we of course need to visually update that every single second to display the new amount of time to the player. So how we're going to do this is by creating a variable called pets, and that's of course going to be equal to stateManager.getData.petRainbow, and then we're going to loop through that once again. So for UUID, comma pet instance in pets do. Then what we're going to do is create a variable called frame, and that's going to be equal to view container, and we want to look for this specific pet inside of there, so pass through the UUID. Then we'll create a variable called isFinished, and that's once again going to be equal to os.time is greater than or equal to the pet instance.rainbow time property, and all we have to do is literally just copy and paste that code right into there. And after we do that, we want to update the clone variable to say frame instead so that we actually are updating the correct things. Cool, and that's all that we have to do with this function. This will update all the frames and everything for each of the specific pets that are currently being upgraded to Rainbow. Of course, now that we've created that function, let's go ahead and use it, and we're going to use that inside of the generate view container. Now we're going to call this after we go through that entire for loop. We're going to say task.spawn, and we're going to create an anonymous function, and we're going to say while the mode equals view do. And then we want to call update pets, and right below that, we want to say task.wait1 so that this updates the pets every single second. And of course, this while loop will stop and break itself whenever the player swaps from the view mode to anything else. Cool, so that's all looking good. Let's then go ahead and actually create the function for generating the make container. So above our update pets function, we're going to create a brand new function called generate pets container. Now we'll once again create a variable called pets, and this time we'll set that equal to stateManager.getData.pets. And then we'll loop through all those pets. So for UUID, comma pet instance, in pets do. Now the only pets that the player is able to make rainbow is golden pets. So if the pet is already rainbow or the pet is not golden, then we don't want to display the pet here. So we're going to say if not pet instance dot golden or pet instance dot rainbow, then continue end. So we only want to display the golden pets here. And after that, we're going to create a variable called pet bun, which is going to be equal to pet utils dot generate pet, and we're going to pass through the make container dot template as well as the make container and the pet instance itself. Now, similar to the pet inventory or the pet bank, below this, we're going to create a variable called selected image, which is going to be equal to pet bun, and then we want to call find first child on here, and we want to look for a child called selected. Now remember, we have to do this because text buns actually have a property called selected, so if we say pet bun dot selected, that'll refer to that specific property, not the image text label that we're looking for called selected. So now that we get that image, let's set the visibility of that equal to false. And then after we do that, inside of the pet bun, we have an image called locked as well, and we're going to set the visibility of this equal to pet instance dot locked. And then finally, whenever the player actually clicks on this bun, we want to do something. So let's go ahead and create an anonymous function for that. And now what we want to do is we want to actually select the pet and add that pet to our selected pets right here. But let's go ahead and create a function for actually doing this. So we're going to create a brand new function called select pet, which is going to accept a pet instance. So petsconfig.petInstance. And now that we've created that function, let's just go ahead and actually call that function whenever we click this specific pet. So we'll say select pet and then just pass through the pet instance to that function. Cool. So now actually working on the select pet function itself, what we're going to do is create a variable for the pet's UUID. So pet.UUID. Then we want to see if the pet is already selected. And how we can do that is by using table.find on the selected pets table. And we want to look for the specific UUID inside of that table. After that, we're going to go ahead and get the pet bun. So we're going to look through the make container and find the first child, which has the UUID as its name. We then are going to create a variable for the selected image as well, so let's just go ahead and copy and paste that into there. Now, if the pet is not selected and the amount of selected pets is equal to 5, then we actually want to not do anything and stop the function right there because we don't want the player to be able to select more than 5 pets. Now, if you want the player to be able to select more than 5 pets when making their rainbow upgrade, you certainly can alter this code right here. So after we check that, we then want to update the visibility of the selected image and basically make it the opposite of whatever it currently is. So we're going to say equals not is selected. Now after that, if the pet is selected, then what we want to do is remove that pet from the selected pets table. So we're going to remove is selected from that table. Otherwise, if the pet is not selected, then we actually want to add that pet to the table and select them. So we're going to add that UUID to the selected pets table. Now after that, inside of the bottom frame, we actually have a bun here called convert. And we're going to update the background color of that bun based on if the player has any pet selected or not. So we're going to say bottom frame dot convert dot background color 3 equals if the amount of selected pets equals 0, then we're going to set the color 3 dot from RGB. And we're going to set that to a darker blue. Now, otherwise, if the player does have some pets selected, then we want to set that to a different color, and we're going to set that to a nice light blue. Then, we want to do something based on the amount of pets that the player currently has selected. Now, if the amount of selected pets equals 0, that means that we basically just deselected a pet, and what we want to do is make all the pets inside of the make container visible again, so the player is now able to select a different pet that they want to make rainbow, for example. So, to do this, we're going to loop through all the children inside of the make container. Now, if the child is a text bun and the child's name does not equal template, then we're going to set the visibility of the child to true. So then after we do that, we then want to check if the amount of selected pets is equal to 1. So if the amount of selected pets is equal to 1, that means that the player selected the first pet. And whenever a player selects a pet, the only pets that we want to then display after that are all of the duplicate pets of that same pet. So basically, if the player is wanting to make a golden dog into a rainbow dog, they're only able to select multiple other golden dogs to combine with that to reduce the amount of time it takes to make it rainbow. So what we want to do is only make those pets visible to the player whenever they select the first pet to turn into rainbow. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and create a function above the select pet function called make duplicates visible, and this is going to accept a single pet, which is of course going to be a pet instance. We'll then get the duplicate pets using the pets config, so get duplicate pets, and we'll pass through the actual pet itself as well as the player's data. We're then going to loop through all the children inside of the make container. So make container get children do. Now if the child is a text button and the child is visible, then we're just going to set the visibility of this to false. After that, we'll then loop through all of the duplicate pets. And then what we'll do is find the button inside of the main container. So find first child, and we're going to look for pet instance.uuid. And now if we're actually able to find that button, then what we want to do is actually set the visibility of that equal to true so that we display all the duplicate pets and hide all of the other ones. Now that we've created that function, let's go back down to the select pet function. And once again, if the amount of selected pets equals 1, meaning this is the first pet that is selected, then we want to make all the duplicates visible and pass through this specific pet right there. Cool, so we're pretty much done with this function, but we actually have to do one more thing. Remember right here where we update the convert button? We need to update the convert button every time the pet is selected. Not only do we need to update the convert button, but we also want to update the info text label inside of here as well. So what we'll do is create a function up here called update bottom label. And first we're going to check the amount of selected pets and check if that equals 0. Now, if that equals 0, then we're going to say bottomframe.info.text, and we're going to set that equal to the basic text, just kind of explaining how our rainbow pet system works. So we're going to say select golden pets to convert to rainbow. The more pets added, the less wait time, exclamation mark. Cool, so that's if the player has no pets selected. Now, if the player does have some pets selected, then we want to update this text label to display how long the upgrade is actually going to take for this pet. Of course, because if the player selects more pets, then the upgrade time is going to decrease, but with less pets, it's going to increase. So we're going to create a variable called upgrade time. Now, I actually forgot to create a function for this, so we're going to go back to our pets config and go right to our get upgrade time function. We're just going to go ahead and copy and paste this, and now we'll rename this to get upgrade time string. And we're not going to make many changes to this, but what we're going to do instead is basically manually convert the seconds into a string that we want to display. So for instance, instead of displaying that amount of seconds, we actually wanted to display 2 days. And then we also want to display 1 day as well. Then we'll display 12 hours, 6 hours, and finally 30 minutes. Now, of course, you can modify this function to however you want. If you want to display this a little bit differently, you can certainly do anything that you want with that. We can then go back to the script, and for the upgrade time variable that we're creating here, we can then use the pets config.get upgrade time string, and we'll pass through the amount of selected pets by saying hashtag selected pets. And now that we've done that, we're then going to update the info text label as well, and that's going to be equal to your pet will be ready in, and then we'll use a little time emoji right there. And then in curly braces, we'll say upgrade time so that it'll display the amount of time it's going to take. And finally, at the end, we'll throw in an exclamation mark. Cool. Now that we've done that, let's then go ahead and call this function at the very bottom here. So update bottom label. And now that's all good to go. Cool. So now that we're finished with all that, we can go back to our original select mode function and actually call the generate pets container right here. Now, something else that we can do inside of the select mode function is anytime this function's called, we're actually going to reset the selected pets variable, and we're just going to set that to a blank table. Now, there's one more thing that we actually have to do, and this is for both of the containers, and that's actually clean those containers. So let's go ahead and create a function up here called clean container. This will accept a container, which is going to be a scrolling frame. Then what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the children inside of that container. So get children do. Now, if the child is a text button or the child is a frame. So we're first going to check if the child is either a text button or a frame. Now make sure you have those surrounded in parentheses, because after that, we then want to check if the child is not named template as well. So if the child is either a text button or a frame and it is not named template, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and destroy that child to clean the container. And also, now that we've created that function, we can actually go ahead and call it in both these functions, and that's the first thing that we're going to call. So clean container inside of here, and then we want to pass through the make container. And then we're also going to copy this and paste that inside of the generate view container, and then we'll pass through the view container. Cool, so now that we've gone through and created all those functions, let's start using a lot of them. Realistically though, the only one that we're going to use for the most part is the select mode right here. But where we're going to begin using that is inside of the generate parts function. Inside of here, whenever the player steps on that hitbox, not only do we want to check if the player is equal to that specific player, but we also want to check that the GUI is not enabled as well, because we don't want to constantly be updating this GUI when we don't need to. So now that we know all that, what we'll then do is call the select mode function on here, and we're not going to pass through any arguments. And after we call select mode, we'll then set the GUI to be enabled so that we can actually see it. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and start scripting some of the buttons. So for instance, inside of the mode frame, we have the make frame, and inside of there, we have the button. So whenever we click on that button, what do we want to do? Well, we want to call the select mode variable and pass through make. And then we want to do the exact same thing, but just kind of the opposite for the view button. So whenever we click on the button inside of the view frame, we want to call select mode and pass through the view argument. Now we also have that convert button inside of the bottom frame, which we want to listen for whenever that's clicked as well. And now whenever this button is clicked, what we want to check is that there are some selected pets. And if there are some selected pets, then we're going to fire off the rainbow pet remote event, and we're just going to pass through the selected pet UUIDs to the server. Now, once again, we have not created this remote event either. We're going to do that after this, so don't worry if you're getting confused at all. Then after that, we have the exit button. So whenever that's clicked, we kind of want to do something a little bit different than normal. And what we want to do is if the player is in a mode, we then basically want to put them back to the main screen. So we're going to call select mode without an argument. Otherwise, if the player is basically at the main screen, what we then want to do is set the enable property of the GUI to false to hide the GUI. Cool, so now we're pretty much done, but we do need to listen for those 2 remote events that we're using to be fired inside of here as well. And to make things easier in our life, why don't we go to the Explorer and actually add them in? So inside of the replicated storage, inside the remotes folder, inside of the pets folder, let's go ahead and duplicate one of these remote events and rename one of them to rainbow pet. And then we'll duplicate that and then rename this one to claim rainbow pet. Cool, so now that we've created both of those, we can go back to our script, and first we'll listen for the rainbow pet remote event to be fired. Now, whenever this remote event is fired, what we'll actually get from this is a pet instance, so petsconfig.pet instance, and we'll also get a time as well for when the pet will be completed. Now, all we're actually going to do inside of here is call task.delay0, and then we want to call the select mode function and pass through the view argument so that it basically just refreshes the GUI for us. Then we're going to copy and paste this, and this time we'll listen for the claim rainbow pet remote event to be fired. And all we're actually going to get from this is a UUID, which is a string. And now inside of here, we actually want to check if the mode is equal to view. And once again, we'll call the select mode view. Now, the reason that we're calling this is because we basically want to refresh the container because we just claimed the pet. So we need to remove a pet from that container. And by just calling select mode and basically generating that container all over again, it'll automatically remove it for us. Cool, so now we're pretty much entirely done with this script. We scripted all of that stuff on the client side, but we actually have one more thing to script on the client side, and that's updating the client state manager. So going inside the replicated storage, inside the client folder, we're going to open up that state module script, and we're going to go all the way down to the upgrade pet remote event, and then we're just going to copy and paste this line right here. Now this time we'll say rainbow pet, and once again, what we're going to get is a pet instance as well as a time, which is going to be a number. And now how we're going to actually update the player's data for this is we're going to say player data, and then we want to get the rainbow table, and then we want to index that with the specific UUID of the pet, and we want to set that equal to the pet instance. Then we're going to go ahead and copy and paste this once again. This time we'll listen for the claim rainbow pet remote event to be fired. And all we're going to get from this is just a UUID, which is a string. So then what we're going to do is index the pet rainbow table with the UUID. And we're going to set that equal to nil because we just want to remove that pet from the pet rainbow table because we just claimed it. Now we're done with the state manager, so we can go ahead and exit out of that. And we're pretty much done with almost everything on the client side, but we still have one more thing to do, which we'll get to that in a minute. But let's go ahead and start scripting this on the server side. So going inside of the server script service, we're going to go ahead and open up our pets module script, and we're going to scroll all the way down to pretty much the bottom. And the first thing that we're going to actually do is update the create pet function right here. So in order to update this correctly, the first thing that we actually have to do is update how the shiny property is set. This should be set to true if the upgrade argument passed to this is either shiny, golden, or rainbow as well. Now the same for golden as well. So if the upgrade equals rainbow, then we want to make that pet golden as well. And then finally, we want to go ahead and add that rainbow property to here, and that's going to be equal to upgrade equals rainbow. Awesome. So next what we'll do is go pretty much once again towards the bottom of this, and we're going to create a brand new function inside of here called rainbow pet. Now this is going to accept a player, which is of course a player, and some pets, which is going to be a table with the UUIDs inside of it. Now the first thing that we want to do, of course, is get the player's profiles. So player data dot profiles, index that with the player. If we're not able to find the profile, then we want to stop the function right there. After that, we're going to create a variable called max queued, and this is how many pets the player can have rainbowing at a single time. And how we're going to get that number is by going to the pets config and using the get max rainbow pets function, and we'll pass through the profile.data. After we create that variable, we then want to check how many are currently queued, and we can do that by saying pets config.get current amount of rainbowing pets, and then we'll once again pass through the profile.data. Now, if the current queued plus 1 is greater than max queued, then we want to stop the function right there. We then also want to check if the amount of pets passed to us is greater than 5, then we want to stop the function right there as well, because we don't want the player to be able to give us more than 5 pets to decrease the amount of time it actually takes. We'll then create a variable called pet instance, which is going to be of the petsconfig.pet instance type. And we need to get the pet instance to kind of see what the base model or the base type of pet we're actually upgrading is. So to get this, we're going to say profile.data, and then we're going to get the pets table, and then we're going to index the pets table with the first UUID in the pets table that the player passed to us. Now, if we're not able to find that pet instance, then we want to stop the function right there because the player doesn't actually own the pet that's inside of that pets table. Now that we've gotten that pet instance, we can use that to get the duplicate pets, which of course is the petsconfig.getDuplicatePets. And we're going to pass through the specific pet instance as well as the profile.data. Then we'll create a variable called pet instances, which is going to be set to a blank table. And now we want to loop through all the pets which were passed to us. So for underscore UUID in pets do. And then we'll create a variable called pet, which is going to be equal to profile.data.pets. And then index that with the specific UUID. Now, if we're not able to find that pet, then we want to actually just stop the function right there entirely. Additionally, even if that pet is found, we want to make sure that it's a duplicate pet. So we're going to say if not table.find duplicate pets, and then pass through that specific pet, then we want to stop the function right there as well because that's not a duplicate pet. And then we also want to make sure that that pet is golden and it's not rainbow already. So we're going to say if not pet.golden or pet.rainbow, then return n. And finally, now that we know that this pet is all good to go and can be used to make a rainbow pet, what we then are going to do is add that pet instance to the pet instances table. So we'll say pet instances and index that table with the UUID and set that equal to the pet instance right there. So after we check and verify all those different pets, we'll then get the upgrade time, which of course is equal to petsconfig.getUpgradeTime. And we'll pass through the amount of pets selected. Then we'll go ahead and actually create the pet. So we're going to say local rainbow pet equals pets.createPet, pass through the pet instance dot model, pass through the pet instance dot rarity, and we're going to set the upgrade to be rainbow. Now that we've created that brand new pet instance, we then need to actually set the rainbow time property of this pet so that we can store the data inside this pet for how long the upgrade is actually going to take. And how we're going to calculate that is by saying os.time, so the current time plus the amount of seconds that it's actually going to take. Cool. So now that we've actually created that pet, let's then go ahead and delete all of those other pets. So for UUID, comma pet in pet instances do, and then we're going to say pets.forceDeletePet, and we're going to pass through the player as well as the UUID. Now that we've deleted all the pets that the player's using to make this one specific pet rainbow, we then need to update the player's data. So profile.data.petRainbow, and then we're going to index this with the rainbow pet's UUID and set that equal to the rainbow pet instance, just like that. And now that we've added that to the player's data, we can then use the rainbow pet remote event, fire client. We're going to notify that player and send that player the rainbow pet, just like that. Awesome. So now that we've created this function, let's go ahead and add it to the networking. So we're going to say remotes.rainbowPet. And what do we want to call it? Well, we of course want to call the rainbow pet function, just like that. Now we also need to create another function up here for claiming the pet. So we're just going to call this claim rainbow pet, which is again going to accept a player as well as a UUID, which is going to be a string. Now, of course, let's go ahead and get the player's profile. So player data.profiles, index that with the specific player. If we're not able to find that, then stop the function right there. Let's then get that pet rainbow instance. So we're going to say local instance equals profile.data.petRainbow, and inside of the pet rainbow table we're going to look for that specific pet by using the UUID. Now if we're not able to find that pet, then we want to stop the function right there. Now that we've gotten that pet instance, let's create a variable for the amount of time it has to upgrade. So upgrade time equals instance.rainbow time. Now if the upgrade time is greater than the current time, then we know that the player is not able to claim the pet yet, so we're going to stop the function right there as well. Now if we get this far in the function, then we know that we should actually give the player the pet. So what we're going to do is update the rainbow property on this pet and set that equal to true. Along with updating that property, we're also going to update the rainbow time property and set that to nil so that we actually remove that property. And now let's give the player the pet. So we're going to say pets.givePet, pass through the player as well as pass through the instance. Then let's update the player's pet rainbow data. So profile.data.petRainbow, index that with the UUID. And now that we've claimed that pet, we want to remove that specific pet from this table. So we're going to set that equal to nil. And finally, now that we've updated that player's data, let's then go ahead and call the claim rainbow pet remote event, fire client, pass through the player as well as the UUID. And now that we've created that function, let's once again go ahead and hook that function up to this remote event right here. So remotes.claim rainbow pet and hook that up to the claim rainbow pet function, just like that. Cool. So now we're pretty much good with this for the most part. Let's go back to our workspace and actually look at this GUI, because because I want to set the no queue text label to no longer be visible, as well as setting the view container to no longer be visible either. And then finally, we'll make this GUI not enabled in either so that we can actually test this whole thing out. Now that we've done all that, let's go ahead and start up our game and test this all out. So hopping directly into our game, let's go ahead over here and touch the Rainbow Pets GUI. And now that the GUI is displayed to us, we can see that we have two options, clicking on either make or view. Let's go ahead and click on make. And now when we click on make, we can actually see all of our golden pets inside of this container right here. If we click on one of these pets, we can see that it becomes selected. And then if we click on more pets, we can also see that that time label is updated down here as well. Now, if we deselect pets, we can see that that's also updated as well. Let's go ahead and convert one of these pets. And now that we're converting one of these pets, we can also see that pet right here. So this pet will be ready in and the amount of time. One thing that we forgot to do was set the template to no longer be visible. And then I also messed up with setting the text of the button. So let's go ahead and fix that. So going inside of the GUI, let's go inside of the view container and then make sure that we set this template to no longer be visible. So that fixes that issue. Then going inside of our pet rainbow script, let's go towards the top here. So for the update pets function that we have right here, inside of the frame, we have the by text button. But also inside of that button, we have a text label called title. So we want to actually set that text label's text to one of these strings instead of setting the text of the text button. Now, along with updating that right there, we also want to just copy and paste it right there inside of the generate view container function to just update that as well. And then let's just update the variable. Cool. So that's all good to go. So again, going inside of here, activating the GUI, let's look at view this time. And now we can see that the timer is ticking down. And this is looking good though. When we click on the exit button, we get taken back to the main menu. And if we click it again, the GUI is no longer displayed. So that's all working perfectly. And then if we go back to the make container, we can make another one of our golden cats in a rainbow as well. So let's go ahead and convert one of them. And we can see that this one's actually going to take 2 days instead of 1 day because we only used one. Now what I'm going to do so that we can fully and easily test this out is I'm going to go to the pets config. I'm going to go to our get upgrade time function and I'm going to set the upgrade time with one selected pet just to 10 seconds so that we can see what that looks like. And then we can actually claim the pet really easily as well. So going into the rainbow pets, we're just going to go ahead and make this cat rainbow. And now we can see that this has 10 seconds left and let's wait for that to finish. And now once this finishes, we can actually see that the whole thing updates and we can click on this claim button right here and we can see that we've now actually claimed that pet and it's no longer displayed there. And now if we look at our pet inventory, well, we can't really tell the difference between our golden pets and our rainbow one if we have any, because we actually have to update the pet inventory GUI as well. Now, what we're going to do to actually start updating this is we're going to go inside of the replicated storage, inside of the client folder, and open up the pet utils module script. Inside of here, we want to go to the generate pet function, and we want to update this a little bit. So the first thing that we want to do is with the model variable right here, when we actually pass through the model to the generate viewport function, we don't actually want to pass through a clone of this. And the reason for that is because when we call get model, that's already cloning the model. So we don't actually have to do that. We only cloned it because we were getting the model directly from the replicated storage previously, but since we've changed from that method to just using this function right here, it's already handled there. And now that we've done that, we then want to check if the pet is rainbow. And if the pet is rainbow, then we want to actually call that rainbow tween function and pass through the clone as well as one. So what this will do is update the background color of whatever text button the pet is being displayed on and constantly change its color. Now, along with updating the generate pet function, we also want to update the get model function as well. So currently in here, we're checking if the current upgrade is golden or if the current upgrade is shiny, but we also want to check if the current upgrade is equal to rainbow as well. And if it is, then we want to call the rainbow tween on this as well. And we want to pass through the descendant as well as 1 for the index. So now what this is going to do is anytime we actually get the pet model, it's going to constantly update the color of that pet model and change it just like we changed the background color of the GUI as well because this pet is rainbow. Cool. So now if we go into our game and look at our inventory, we can actually see this right in front of us. Additionally, let's go ahead and equip this pet as well. And we can see that the pet is changing colors right here as well. So that's looking great. Now, like I said, we do actually need to update the pet's inventory local script. So what we're going to do is go to the starter player. Inside of the starter player scripts, inside of the GUI folder, we have the pet's inventory local script right here. And where we want to go is actually to the update info function. Now, what we want to update is, like I said, we don't need to clone this model here when we call the get model function. So let's go ahead and delete that. And that's it. That's all we actually had to do. And now when we go into our game, we can see that the pet is changing all of its colors completely. And now we can also see that the pet is being displayed correctly inside of the GUI, constantly changing its colors anytime it's selected or anytime it's displayed. So that's looking great. And that's all working perfectly. So that's awesome. Now let's go back to our pets config module. And remember how I changed the upgrade time right here so that we could easily test this out? Let's actually go ahead and change that back to what it was originally. And since we're in the pets config, let's actually update our get pet clicks function. So here we go. We have the function right here. And inside of this function, we check if the current upgrade is equal to shiny, then we increase the pet's clicks by 25%. We then check if the pet is golden, and then we increase it by 50%. Now let's check if the upgrade is rainbow, and if it's rainbow, then let's increase the clicks by 75%. And now with that being done, we fully implemented rainbow pets into our game. With that all being said, that's going to be it for this episode. As always, if you guys did enjoy the video or did help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also the subscribe button, and turn those post notifications on so you get notified every time I upload a brand new video. Of course, I have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that we made during this video. There's a link down below the description, and you guys are going to check that out. With that being said, I'll see you guys in the next episode.